You do not bomb the Japanese home islands. This was the fundamental truth of naval warfare in early 1942. Japan had spent 2,000 years believing their islands were sacred and untouchable. The kami, the divine wind, had destroyed Mongol invasion fleets in the 13th century. Geography itself protected them. The home islands lay 3,600 miles from Pearl Harbor, 2,400 miles from the Philippines, 1,800 miles from the nearest American base. No enemy bomber had the range to reach Tokyo and return. No carrier would dare approach close enough to launch strikes. Japanese naval strength would annihilate any fleet foolish enough to try. The Imperial Japanese Navy had calculated these distances with precision. Their defensive perimeter stretched across the Pacific, from the Aleutians to the Gilberts, from the Marshalls to the Dutch East Indies. Any American attack would be detected hundreds of miles out. Submarines would spot the carriers. Land-based bombers would attack from island bases. The combined fleet would sortie from its anchorages and destroy the Americans before they could threaten the home islands. Japan had proven this doctrine worked. On December 7, 1941, they struck Pearl Harbor with carrier-based aircraft, a devastating surprise attack that crippled the Pacific Fleet. Then they rolled across Southeast Asia like a tsunami. Hong Kong fell. Singapore fell. The Philippines were collapsing. The Dutch East Indies were conquered. Burma was invaded. The Japanese military seemed unstoppable. Their soldiers believed in their invincibility. Their civilians believed in their divine protection. Their government believed the Americans lacked the will to fight back. And for 4 months after Pearl Harbor, nothing challenged that belief. American carriers tried hit-and-run raids on Japanese-held islands. They launched strikes on the Marshalls, on Wake Island, on Marcus Island. Minor victories, pinpricks. The Japanese brushed them aside. The home islands remained untouched. Tokyo remained safe. The emperor remained protected. The myth of invincibility remained intact. American military planners looked at the maps and saw the same impossible distances the Japanese saw. Army Air Force bombers based in China might reach Tokyo if they had bases, which they didn't. If they had supply lines, which they didn't. If the Japanese didn't overrun China first, which they were trying to do. The B-17 Flying Fortress had the range, but no airfield within reach of Japan. The B-24 Liberator had even more range, but the same problem. Carrier aircraft couldn't reach Tokyo from safe launch distances and return. They'd run out of fuel over the Pacific. The mathematics were unbreakable. Japan was untouchable. But in January 1942, a Navy captain named Francis Lowe looked at a carrier deck and had an idea that everyone told him was insane. And in February 1942, a 45-year-old Army Air Force lieutenant colonel named James Doolittle volunteered to prove that the impossible was merely difficult. James Doolittle is 45 years old in February 1942. This makes him ancient by pilot standards. Most fighter aces are in their 20s, most bomber pilots in their early 30s. But Doolittle is not most pilots. He was born in Alameda, California in 1896, grew up in Alaska during the gold rush, became a boxer, a bantamweight who fought professionally to pay for school, earned a degree in engineering from Berkeley, joined the Army during World War I and became a flight instructor. After the war, he stayed in the military and became a test pilot. In 1922, he made the first coast-to-coast flight across the United States in under 24 hours. In 1925, he earned a doctorate in aeronautics from MIT, one of the first pilots with an advanced degree in aerospace engineering. In 1929, he made the first successful instrument-only flight, taking off, flying, and landing entirely on instruments in zero visibility. Doolittle became famous for air racing. He won the Schneider Trophy in 1925, flying a seaplane at 232 miles per hour. He set speed records. he tested experimental aircraft for the Army. He joined Shell Oil in 1930 as a test pilot and aviation manager. When war broke out in Europe, he returned to the Army Air Force in 1940. By early 1942, he's a lieutenant colonel and one of the most experienced pilots in America. But experience doesn't make the impossible possible. Here's what happened. On December 7th, 1941, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. 8 battleships are sunk or damaged. Over 2,000 Americans are killed. The Pacific Fleet is crippled. President Franklin Roosevelt addresses Congress on December 8th, calling it a date which will live in infamy. America declares war, and then America faces a brutal reality. Japan is winning everywhere. The Philippines are being overrun. Wake Island falls after a heroic defense. Guam falls. Hong Kong falls. British forces retreat through Malaya. The Japanese seem unstoppable. American morale is in free fall. The public wants revenge. The military wants a victory. Any victory, to prove Japan isn't invincible. In January 1942, Captain Francis Lowe of the Navy's Plans Division is visiting Norfolk, Virginia. He watches Army pilots practicing carrier takeoffs and landings, training for potential situations where fighters might need to operate from ships. Lowe has a thought. What if you could launch Army bombers from a carrier? Not land them back. That's impossible. Bombers are too heavy and too fast. But launch them one way, bomb a target, and have them fly to friendly territory to land. Lowe takes the idea to Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations. King contacts General Henry Hap Arnold, commander of the Army Air Forces. Could this work? What bomber has the range and capability? They study the options. The B-17 Flying Fortress is too big. Its wingspan won't fit on a carrier deck. The B-24 Liberator has the same problem. But the B-25 Mitchell, a medium bomber designed for the Army, might work. Wingspan, 67 feet. Length, 53 feet. It's not designed for carrier operations, but it's small enough to possibly fit on a deck. The plan crystallizes. Load B-25s onto a carrier. Sail to within 400 to 500 miles of Japan, close enough for the bombers to reach Tokyo, far enough that the carrier hopefully escapes detection. Launch the bombers. They hit Tokyo and other cities. Then they fly west to China, land at friendly airfields, refuel, and fly to safety. It's insane. B-25s have never taken off from a carrier. No one knows if it's even possible. The bombers will be overloaded with fuel, dangerous and unstable. The crews will have to fly over 16 hours after takeoff, mostly over open ocean, with no navigation aids. If they can't find the Chinese airfields in darkness, they'll crash or run out of fuel. The Japanese will almost certainly shoot down some of the bombers over Tokyo. Others will be lost over China. The survival rate might be 10%, maybe less. This is a suicide mission, disguised as a raid, but it might work, and America desperately needs a victory. In February 1942, the Army Air Force asks for a volunteer to lead the mission. They need someone with exceptional flying skill, engineering knowledge, and the guts to attempt something impossible. James Doolittle volunteers immediately. He's given 24 B-25 Mitchell bombers and told to select and train 80 volunteers, 5 men per aircraft. He chooses crews from the 17th Bombardment Group. These are experienced pilots, navigators, bombardiers, gunners, and engineers. But none of them have carrier experience. None of them have flown combat missions over heavily defended targets. And none of them know what they're volunteering for. Doolittle tells them only this. This is a dangerous mission. You might not come back. If you want out, speak up now. No one will think less of you. Not one man drops out. They train in Florida. Doolittle brings in Navy Lieutenant Henry Miller, who teaches them how to take off in the shortest possible distance. A B-25 normally needs a 1,000-foot runway, but from a carrier deck, they'll have less than 500 feet. The pilots practice short takeoffs until they can get airborne in 450 feet. They practice low-level navigation. They practice fuel conservation, flying at minimum power settings to maximize range. They practice formation flying and bomb runs. None of them know the target yet. Doolittle keeps that secret. On March 31st, 1942, 16 B-25s are loaded onto the USS Hornet, a Yorktown-class aircraft carrier, at Naval Air Station Alameda in California. The bombers barely fit. Their wings hang over the edge of the deck. There's no room for the carrier's own aircraft. They've been offloaded to make space for the B-25s. The bombers are chained to the deck. They're so tightly packed that once loaded, they can't be moved. The first bomber to take off will be the one at the front of the deck. Doolittle's aircraft is first. On April 2nd, the Hornet sets sail from San Francisco. The crew still doesn't know where they're going. Rumors spread. Some think they're headed for Hawaii. Others think the Philippines. A few guess they're going to attack Japan, but dismiss it as fantasy. On April 13th, the Hornet meets up with Task Force 16 in the mid-Pacific. The USS Enterprise, another carrier, along with cruisers and destroyers. Now they have 2 carriers, 16 B-25s on Hornet's deck, and a covering force. Vice Admiral William Bull Halsey commands the task force from Enterprise. On April 17th, Halsey briefs the entire fleet. The target is Tokyo. The mission is to bomb the Japanese capital and escape to China. The men cheer. They're going to strike back. The plan: sail to within 400 miles of Japan on the night of April 18th. Launch the bombers before dawn on April 19th. The bombers hit Tokyo and other cities in daylight, then fly west to China, arriving after dark. Land at prepared airfields near Chuchao, refuel and fly to safety. It's still a suicide mission, but now it's a suicide mission with a purpose. April 18th, 1942. Dawn. Task Force 16 is 650 miles from Tokyo, 250 miles farther out than planned. They're running ahead of schedule because of good weather. Doolittle calculates they can close another 200 miles before launching, getting them to 450 miles out by dawn on April 19th. But at 7:38 hours, a lookout on Enterprise spots a Japanese patrol boat, the Nito Maru, a small fishing vessel modified for picket duty. The boat has seen them. It's radioing Tokyo. The cruiser, USS Nashville, opens fire. Shells bracket the fishing boat. After a few minutes, the Nito Maru is sinking, but the damage is done. The radio message got through. Japan knows there's an American carrier task force approaching. Halsey signals Doolittle, launch planes. To Colonel Doolittle and his gallant command, good luck and God bless you. Doolittle checks his watch. It's 0800 hours. They're 800 miles from Tokyo, 400 miles farther than planned. The extra distance means they won't have enough fuel to reach the Chinese airfields. Best case, they'll crash land in occupied China or bail out over the ocean. The mission just became even more suicidal. Doolittle gathers his crews. We're launching now. We've been spotted. We're farther out than we wanted. You know what this means. But we're going anyway. Any man who wants to stay aboard can. No shame in it. Every man boards his aircraft. His USS Hornet, Pacific Ocean, 650 nautical miles east of Tokyo. April 18th, 1942. And 0820 hours. The carrier turns into the wind. 30-knot wind over the deck. Good for takeoff, but the ship is pitching in heavy seas. Waves crash over the bow. The deck rises and falls. Spray soaks the B-25s. The bombers are already fueled and loaded with bombs. Each aircraft carries 4 500-pound bombs, 3 high-explosive, 1 incendiary cluster. Maximum fuel load, 1,100 gallons, far over the normal capacity. The weight makes the bombers sluggish and dangerous. Doolittle's B-25, tail number 40 to 344, sits at the front of the deck. His crew, Lieutenant Richard Cole, co-pilot, Lieutenant Henry Potter, navigator, Sergeant Fred Bramer, bombardier. Sergeant Paul Leonard, engineer gunner. Doolittle runs through his checklist. Engines start. The twin, right R, 2600 Cyclone radials roar to life. Oil pressure good. Fuel mixture set. Flaps down. Trim set for takeoff. This is the most dangerous moment. If he crashes on takeoff, he blocks the deck and traps the other 15 bombers. The entire mission fails before it begins. A Navy deck officer stands at the front of the flight deck, holding checkered flags. He's timing the carrier's pitch. When the bow rises on a wave, the deck angles upward slightly, a natural ramp that helps the bomber get airborne. The deck officer has to time the takeoff signal perfectly. The carrier rises, falls, rises, falls. Doolittle releases the brakes. The B-25 surges forward. The engines scream at full power. The heavily loaded bomber accelerates slowly, too slowly. The deck is only 467 feet long. Doolittle needs 120 miles per hour to get airborne. He's at 60, 70, 80. The end of the deck rushes toward him. The deck officer drops the checkered flag. Doolittle pulls back on the yoke. The B-25's nose lifts. The main wheels leave the deck. For a terrifying second, the bomber hangs in the air, mushing. Not quite flying, not quite falling. The bow of the carrier drops beneath them. Open ocean ahead. The B-25 is 50 feet above the water, barely flying, massively overweight. Doolittle holds the nose level. Airspeed builds, 65 miles per hour, 70, 80. The bomber accelerates slowly, 90, 100. The controls start responding. Doolittle raises the landing gear. Drag decreases. The B-25 climbs. They're airborne. Doolittle circles once, waiting for the other bombers. Over the next hour, all 16 B-25s take off from Hornet. Every single one makes it. No crashes, no failures. Ted Lawson's crew in The Ruptured Duck takes off 6th. Travis Hoover's crew launches 2nd. Edgar McElroy's crew in Whirligig launches 9th. Dean Hallmark's crew in aircraft number 6 launches last. He has the shortest takeoff run and nearly doesn't make it, his wheels dipping so close to the water that spray hits the fuselage. But they all make it. 16 bombers form up loosely and turn west toward Japan. 650 miles. 4.5 hours of flying over open ocean. Doolittle leads. The bombers fly at 200 feet, just above the wave tops, below Japanese radar coverage. The plan is to approach Tokyo from the east, bomb in daylight, and escape to the west. Inside Doolittle's cockpit, the tension is quiet. Cole monitors the engines. Potter navigates, tracking their course toward the Japanese coast. Bramer prepares the bombs. Leonard watches for fighters. The ocean stretches endlessly ahead. They're committed now. No turning back. The Hornet is already retreating at flank speed, racing away from Japanese search aircraft. The bombers are alone. 12:30 hours. The Japanese coast appears, a dark line on the horizon. Doolittle checks his position. They're approaching from the southeast, exactly as planned. He climbs to 1,200 feet. Low enough to avoid radar, high enough to drop bombs accurately. The other bombers spread out, each heading for its assigned target. 13 bombers will hit Tokyo. 3 will strike Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe. Doolittle's target, Tokyo. Specifically, industrial areas, factories, military installations. The orders are clear: no imperial palace, no civilian areas without military value. This is a military strike, not terror bombing. 13:15 hours. Tokyo appears ahead. Doolittle cannot believe what he sees. The city is undefended. No fighters in the air, no barrage balloons, no heavy anti-aircraft fire. The Japanese didn't believe the air raid warning. They thought the spotting report from the Nitomaru was a mistake. American bombers can't reach Tokyo. It's impossible. So when the air raid sirens sounded, Most people ignored them. Some civilians are on rooftops watching. They think this is a drill. Doolittle lines up on his target, a factory complex north of the Imperial Palace. Range, 2 miles. Altitude, 1,200 feet. Speed, 220 miles per hour. Bomb bay doors open. Bombardier, this is pilot. Target ahead. Stand by. Bremer lies prone in the nose, looking through the Norden bomb sight. The factory complex fills the sight. Crosshairs align. Steady, steady. Bombs away. 4 500-pound bombs drop from the B-25's belly. They fall for 3 seconds. Then, impact. Explosions erupt across the factory complex. Fires start immediately. Black smoke boils into the sky. Doolittle banks left, turning west. Behind him, Tokyo is erupting in chaos. The other bombers are hitting their targets. Explosions ripple across the city. Factories, warehouses, oil storage tanks, power plants, all taking hits. Some bombs miss, some hit civilian areas by mistake. Navigation at low altitude is imperfect. But most bombs hit military targets. The Japanese finally react. Air raid sirens wail across Tokyo. Civilians panic, running for shelters. Japanese army fighters scramble from airfields. Ki-43 Hayabusa fighters, nimble and fast. But the American bombers are already leaving, flying at low altitude, hard to spot, hard to intercept. Ted Lawson's crew in the ruptured duck hits a steel mill. The bombs ignite oil storage tanks. Massive fireballs roll into the sky. Lawson turns west, chased by Japanese fighters. His gunner fires back. No hits confirmed, but the fighters break off. Travis Hoover's crew drops bombs on an ammunition factory. Secondary explosions ripple across the facility for minutes. The bomber escapes untouched. Edgar McElroy's crew in Whirligig hits a warehouse district. Fires spread through the wooden buildings. The crew sees Japanese civilians running in panic, but not every bomber makes it out clean. Dean Hallmark's crew, the last to take off, gets intercepted by Japanese fighters over Tokyo. Cannon fire rips through the B-25. One engine is hit. The bomber struggles west, trailing smoke, losing altitude. Hallmark nurses the crippled aircraft toward the coast. They won't make China. Best case, they ditch in the ocean near the Chinese coast and hope for rescue. Lieutenant Bill Farrow's crew hits Nagoya, then turns west over Japanese-controlled waters. Japanese patrol boats fire at them. Anti-aircraft fire bursts around the bomber. They escape, but their fuel consumption is higher than expected. Too many evasive maneuvers, too much throttle use. All 16 bombers turn west, heading for China. But now the math becomes brutal. Doolittle's navigation shows they're farther out than planned. The early launch means an extra 250 miles to fly. They're bucking headwinds. Prevailing winds from the west slow them down. Fuel consumption is higher than calculated. Weather over China is deteriorating. A storm system is moving in, bringing low clouds and rain. The bombers won't make the Chinese airfields. Doolittle does the math in his head. They have maybe 1,500 miles to fly to reach the airfields near Chuchao. At current fuel burn rate, they'll run out of fuel 50 to 100 miles short. They'll have to crash land in the dark, in mountains, in occupied China. He keeps flying. What else can you do? 1,800 hours. The Chinese coast appears ahead. Doolittle crosses the coastline at low altitude, Japanese-occupied territory below. He climbs to 8,000 feet, looking for the airfield at Chuchao. But the weather has closed in. Clouds blanket everything. Rain reduces visibility to near zero. Navigation is guesswork. Potter tries to calculate their position by dead reckoning, but wind drift has thrown them off course. 1930 hours. Dark, fuel gauges showing empty, engines still running on fumes. Doolittle makes the call. Crew, this is pilot. We're not going to make the airfield. Prepare to bail out. The crew puts on parachutes. Doolittle sets the autopilot to keep the B-25 flying straight and level. One by one, The crew jumps. Cole goes first, disappearing into darkness. Potter follows. Bramer. Leonard. Finally, Doolittle. He rolls out of the bomber at 8,000 feet. Free fall for 2 seconds. Then pulls the ripcord. The parachute deploys with a jarring jolt. Doolittle swings under the canopy, descending through clouds and rain. He can't see the ground. No idea what's below. Mountains, trees, buildings, water. He hits the ground hard. Rice paddy. Soft mud cushions the impact. Doolittle rolls, gets tangled in parachute lines, fights free. He's alive, uninjured, in the middle of nowhere in China. He has no idea where his crew is. He has no idea if anyone else survived. Over the next hours and days, the reality becomes clear. Of the 16 bombers, 15 crashed in China or ditched in the ocean. One landed in the Soviet Union. Captain Edward York's crew, short on fuel, diverted north and landed at a Soviet airfield near Vladivostok. The Soviets interned them. Technically neutral with Japan, they couldn't release American military personnel. Of the 80 men who launched from Hornet, 3 died in crashes, Corporal Leland Factor and 2 others killed when their bomber crashed into a mountain. 8 were captured by Japanese forces in occupied China. The rest evaded capture with help from Chinese civilians and resistance fighters. Doolittle's crew all survived. They reunited over 2 days, helped by Chinese villagers who hid them from Japanese patrols. They eventually made contact with nationalist Chinese forces and were evacuated. But Doolittle believed he had failed. His entire mission depended on recovering the bombers in China and using them for future raids. He'd lost all 16 aircraft. He'd lost men. The tactical objective, bombing Tokyo, was accomplished, but at what cost? Doolittle believed he would be court-martialed. If you find this kind of untold history as fascinating as we do, we'd be honored if you'd hit that subscribe button. We believe these stories of audacious courage deserve to be told, and by subscribing, you help us ensure they aren't forgotten. Because what Doolittle didn't know, what none of the raiders knew as they struggled through Chinese mountains, was that their mission had just changed the entire course of the Pacific War. April 18th, 1942, 1400 hours. Tokyo, Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the combined fleet, receives the first reports. American bombers over Tokyo. The home islands have been attacked. Damage is minor. A few factories damaged, some fires, maybe 50 civilians killed. Militarily insignificant. But psychologically devastating. The Japanese government had told its people that the home islands were invulnerable, that Japan was protected by the gods, that American bombers could never reach Tokyo. And in a single afternoon, 16 American bombers proved that was a lie. The military implications cascade immediately. First, where did the bombers come from? Japanese intelligence assumed they came from a carrier. But carriers can't launch heavy bombers. Everyone knows that. Except the Americans just did it. Which means Japanese doctrine was wrong. Which means the home islands are vulnerable to future raids. Which means defenses must be strengthened. The Japanese immediately recall fighter squadrons from the front lines to defend Tokyo. Aircraft desperately needed in the Pacific are pulled back to the home islands. Air defense resources are diverted. The offensive against the Allies slows because Japan has to defend its own airspace. Second, if carriers can strike Tokyo, then carriers must be destroyed. Yamamoto had been planning a decisive battle in the Central Pacific, an operation to draw out the American carriers and sink them. Now, that plan becomes urgent. Japan must eliminate the American carrier threat before another raid hits Tokyo. Yamamoto accelerates his plans for Operation MI, the invasion of Midway Island. The objective: seize Midway, threaten Hawaii, force the Americans to respond with their carriers, and destroy them in battle. The Doolittle raid transforms this from a strategic plan into an urgent necessity. What Yamamoto doesn't know is that American codebreakers have cracked the Japanese naval codes. They know about Midway. They're preparing a trap. The Battle of Midway happens 6 weeks after the Doolittle raid. On June 4th, 1942, American carriers ambush the Japanese fleet. In 5 minutes, American dive bombers sink 3 Japanese carriers. A fourth carrier is sunk later that day. Japan loses 4 fleet carriers, hundreds of aircraft, and thousands of experienced pilots. The battle is the turning point of the Pacific War, and it happens because Yamamoto felt compelled to respond to the Doolittle raid's psychological impact. Third, the Chinese who helped the Doolittle raiders pay a terrible price. After the raid, Japanese forces in China hunt for the airmen. Chinese civilians and guerrillas hide them, guide them to safety, give them food and shelter. The Japanese respond with genocidal fury. They implement Operation Seigo, a scorched earth campaign through the coastal provinces of China. Villages that helped the Americans are destroyed. Estimates suggest that 250,000 Chinese civilians were killed in retaliation for helping the Doolittle raiders. The cost of the raid extends far beyond the 80 American airmen. Fourth, American morale soars. Back in the United States, news of the raid electrifies the public. After 4 months of defeats, Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, Wake Island, Bataan, Americans finally have a victory. It doesn't matter that the damage to Tokyo was minor. What matters is the message. Japan can be hit. Japan can be hurt. America is fighting back. President Roosevelt holds a press conference. Reporters ask where the bombers came from. Roosevelt grins and says, "Shangri-La," a reference to the fictional Himalayan paradise in the novel Lost Horizon. The joke becomes legend. The Navy later names an aircraft carrier USS Shangri-La in honor of the raid. But what about the men captured by the Japanese? 8 Doolittle raiders were captured. Dean Hallmark, William Farrow, Robert Meader, Chase Nielsen, Robert Hite, Jacob DeShazer, George Barr, and Harold Spatz. The Japanese transported them to Tokyo, imprisoned them, tortured them. They were tried in a sham military tribunal for inhuman acts, specifically bombing civilians. Never mind that the Japanese had been bombing Chinese civilians for years. Never mind that the raid targeted military facilities. In October 1942, the Japanese executed 3 of them, Hallmark, Farrow, and Spatz. They were tied to crosses and shot. Meader died of starvation and disease in prison in December 1943. The other 4, Nielsen, Hite, DeShazer, and Barr, survived over 3 years of imprisonment, torture, and starvation. They were liberated in August 1945 when the war ended. Jacob DeShazer's story deserves its own telling. He spent 40 months in Japanese prison camps. He was tortured, starved, kept in solitary confinement. But he was given a Bible and became a Christian. After the war, he returned to Japan, not for revenge, but as a missionary. He spent 30 years in Japan, founding churches, preaching forgiveness. He died in 2008 at age 95, having spent more of his life in Japan as a missionary than he did as a prisoner. And Doolittle, the man who believed he had failed, he made it out of China with help from the nationalist Chinese military. He flew to Chongqing, then to India, then back to the United States. He expected court-martial. He expected punishment for losing 16 bombers and failing to reach the Chinese airfields. Instead, he was promoted 2 grades, from lieutenant colonel to brigadier general, skipping the rank of full colonel entirely. President Roosevelt personally awarded him the Medal of Honor in a White House ceremony. The citation praised his conspicuous leadership above and beyond the call of duty, and his unfaltering determination in planning and executing the raid. Doolittle went on to command the 8th Air Force in Europe, leading strategic bombing campaigns against Germany. He retired as a 4-star general. He became a businessman and consultant after the war. He lived until 1993, dying at age 96, one of the last survivors of the raid he thought had failed. The Doolittle Raiders held annual reunions for decades after the war. They commissioned a special bottle of cognac, Hennessy Very Special, vintage 1896, the year Doolittle was born. They kept the bottle in a custom case with 80 silver goblets, each engraved with the name of a raider. The goblets were placed upside down. When a raider died, his goblet was turned right side up at the next reunion. The tradition continued for over 70 years. Each year, fewer raiders attended. The goblets were turned one by one. In November 2013, 4 raiders remained. They held their final reunion at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Cole, Doolittle's co-pilot, was 98. Staff Sergeant David Thatcher was 92. Lieutenant Colonel Edward Saylor was 93. Staff Sergeant Robert Height, one of the prisoners of war, was 93. They opened the bottle of cognac. They toasted their fallen comrades. 76 goblets stood upright. 4 remained upside down. Over the next years, the final 4 passed away. Edward Saylor died in January 2015 at age 94. Robert Height died in March 2015 at age 95, the last surviving POW from the raid. David Thatcher died in June 2016 at age 94. Richard Cole, Doolittle's co-pilot, the last surviving Doolittle raider, died on April 9, 2019 at age 103. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. An Air Force flyover included B-25 Mitchell bombers, the same aircraft type he flew over Tokyo 77 years earlier. All 80 goblets now stand upright. The cognac bottle and goblets are displayed at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. Visitors can see them, a reminder of 80 men who volunteered for a mission they knew was probably fatal, who bombed Tokyo when everyone said it was impossible, and who changed the course of history. But here's what matters most about the Doolittle raid. It wasn't a tactically decisive victory. The damage to Tokyo was minimal. The loss of 16 bombers was significant. 3 men died in crashes. 8 were captured, 4 of whom died in captivity or execution. From a purely military cost-benefit analysis, the raid barely registers. But war isn't just mathematics. War is psychology. War is morale. War is belief. Before April 18, 1942, Japan believed it was invincible. After April 18, 1942, that belief was shattered. The Japanese military had to divert resources to defend the home islands. They had to accelerate their plans for Midway, which led to catastrophic defeat. They had to confront the reality that America could strike them anywhere, anytime. Before April 18, 1942, America was reeling from defeats. After April 18, 1942, Americans believed they could win. The raid proved that audacity and innovation could overcome seemingly impossible odds. It proved that American airmen had the skill and courage to strike the enemy's heart. The raid changed the strategic calculation for both sides. It forced Japan onto the defensive. It energized American resolve. And it showed that the rules everyone accepted as unbreakable, you do not bomb the Japanese home islands, were only true until someone broke them. James Doolittle believed he had failed because he lost 16 bombers, but he succeeded because he proved that courage and creativity matter more than conventional wisdom. He succeeded because he led 80 men on a mission that everyone said was impossible. He succeeded because when the moment demanded someone step forward and do something insane, he volunteered without hesitation. The goblets at Dayton represent more than 80 airmen. They represent the principle that impossible is just a word, that myths of invincibility are exactly that, myths. That ordinary men, when faced with extraordinary circumstances, can accomplish things that change the world. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Every click tells the algorithm this piece of history is worth remembering. We're dedicated to rescuing these forgotten stories from the archives. If you want to join us on this mission, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment with your city or state and tell us if someone in your family served in World War II or the Air Force. Thank you for ensuring that Lieutenant Colonel James H. Doolittle and the 80 men of the Doolittle raid do not disappear into silence. They launched from a carrier deck when everyone said bombers couldn't do that. They bombed Tokyo when everyone said the home islands were untouchable. They changed history when everyone said one raid wouldn't matter. They proved that impossible is just the starting point. They deserve to be remembered.